Oh my goodness. It wasn't the height aspect. I'm not scared of heights. It's just the helicopter and jumping out of it in full dive gear that was just kind of like, oh, I guess I'm doing this now.
Off-Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. In this conversation, I speak with Gabriella Gough about her first breaths through her progression to earning a divemaster certification, a journey embraced with the help of her local diving community in Southern California, a journey that led her to earn a spot in the Ventura County Sheriff's Search and Rescue Dive Team, an education in marine biology, embracing challenges, the beauty of kelp forests, jumping out of helicopters, and much more. Please enjoy. Gabriella, how are you doing? It's this evening for you, correct?
It is. It's 6 p.m. It is a fabulous day. I got to go diving this morning, so far so good.
Awesome. And so, do you go by Gabriella, or I noticed you said sign off Gabs on your emails, so I was just wondering.
Yeah, Gabs. I go by Gabs.
Oh, okay, cool. Where exactly are you from?
I'm from Southern California, so I basically dive out of Malibu and Santa Barbara. That's where I'm based out of.
Oh, okay. I very much enjoy Southern California. I lived in Big Bear Lake for probably about 6 or 7 years.
Okay.
So, yeah, I absolutely love Southern California. I feel like it's probably the best weather on the planet, like just year round. It's just absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, I never really did any diving there, so I'm excited to hear more about the diving that you do and what you have going on there. But my second question I would like to ask is, tell me how and why you became a scuba diver. Tell me about that first breath underwater. What led to that moment? Was it, I absolutely love this? Was it, I absolutely hate this? Was it, this is okay? Tell me all about it.
Yeah, so I've been certified for just over 4 years now. But prior to being certified, my first breaths underwater were actually when I was in Hawaii. And there was somebody that I knew that was a scuba diver. They were experienced. I don't remember what their level was, but they were like, hey, let's go scuba diving. I'll take you scuba diving. I'll kind of show you the quick rundown of how to do it. I didn't know any better at the time, so I was like, heck yeah, let's get into it. Well, as you can imagine, it didn't go very well. We kind of did this underwater, I guess you could call it a tri-scuba. I didn't even know what the beastie was called. I didn't know what I was putting in my mouth. I didn't know what these things were called. But then the next day they're like, yep, let's go diving. So we're trying to get through this surf zone, and well, as you can imagine, it didn't go very well. So the person in charge called the dive, and I honestly don't know how the shop rented me gear because I wasn't certified. So, I'm not going to put anybody on blast, but let's just say it wasn't the greatest first experience. But I did go to university for marine biology. That's what I studied. So I figured, it kind of comes with the trade to be a scuba diver. So luckily that experience did not put me off of diving. So a few years later, 2020 rolls around and I'm ready to go to grad school. I was planning on moving to Australia to go to grad school. And so I was like, I'm going to be on the Great Barrier Reef. I have to be dive certified. This was in 2020 when, everything was happening around the world, and I emailed the closest dive shop to me because there was actually a gentleman at Trader Joe's, which is a grocery store around here, if you guys don't know. And you know how the Trader Joe's employees are always so friendly, and this guy was asking what I did over the weekend. I asked him what he did. He's like, oh, I went lobster hunting. And I was like, oh, no way. And he's showing me all these videos of him scuba diving, catching lobsters. And I was like, no way, what shop did you go with? And he told me the shop, and I was like, I'm in. And I've actually been with that shop, SC Diving, ever since for the last 4 years. So yeah, I got open water certified during the pandemic, which was definitely a different kind of experience. But I honestly didn't plan on doing anything other than open water because I was like, I just want to be certified. I just want to go diving in Australia and kind of, whatever comes of it, comes of it. But I obviously went a lot farther than just open water. So I fell in love with it. I was just hooked from the minute I took my first breath. It was the official first breath, I should say. The certified first breath.
The second first breath, I like to say.
Exactly. It's crazy because I've never been so cold in my entire life than I was on my first dive. I was mildly hypothermic. The water's 54 degrees. I don't know how or why I ever got back in the water, but I did. And I am so grateful for that. But I loved it so much, so I was like, I'm going to go further. I'm going to do advanced open water. So I went and did my advanced, and then the buddy that I had at the time said, I really want to take you to this one dive site. Now, it's a more advanced dive site. It's challenging. And he said, I'll take you there if you become a rescue diver. So, of course, that was my incentive. I'm like, I need to dive this site. This is like, I've only heard amazing things. I got to go. So I became rescue certified. And then the instructor, my dive instructor, he's kind of like a dive dad to me now. He's just the greatest human ever. Once I got my rescue, he pulled me to the side and he was like, you would make an amazing dive master. And that just gave me the confidence and, I don't know, just the confidence in myself to go to dive master. So I went ahead and did my dive master course.
Real quick, what was the name of the dive site that it requires rescue, or is it just like a further out? Is there currents? Like, what makes it a little bit more challenging?
Yeah, so it's called Point Doom. The Pinnacle is at Point Doom. It's in Malibu. It's definitely an advanced dive site. I personally probably wouldn't take anybody that's not rescue or hire just because the current can change on literally a moment's notice. There's a beach just around maybe like half mile down we call Bailout Beach because sometimes the current will be in your favor on the way out to the dive site and then it'll switch mid-dive. The current's so strong you can't get back to your entry and exit point. So it takes you down to this beach called Bailout Beach, which is where we bail out and we have to hike up the mountain like, a mile back with all of our gear on. It's, if you know the cliffs in Malibu, it's not an easy feat. So it's the currents can pick up, it's about a third of a mile swim out to the dive site. So it's definitely, physically challenging. It's a deeper dive. You can get to 100 feet on that dive. And the shore break it usually breaks right on shore. So the surf entry can be challenging, we've actually dove it twice this year, which is super rare for us to be able to dive it multiple times a year because the conditions have to honestly be pretty pristine to dive it, at least with scuba gear on. That was the rescue dive site that I was like, I need to dive this site.
And then if you don't mind me asking, that first time that you went diving, mm-hmm. You said it obviously didn't go good. Like, was it just kind of not knowing the gear? What, like, everything is new? Kind of, can you tell me a little bit more about that, if that's okay?
As with anything in scuba diving, you usually read some type of training manual before you do it. You go into a classroom, you read it online, then you go into a pool and do it, or some confined water. Now, I did none of that. So I didn't know, like I said, what obesity stood for. I didn't know what I was putting on my body. I didn't know how much weight this was going to have. And, I'm in Hawaii, so the water's warm, but, after a while, you can get cold no matter what the water temp, as long as it's under your body temp. So I was so cold that training dive, you could say. I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know what inflate, deflate button was. I genuinely had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know anything about the physics of diving. None of that was given to me. So it was, a little unconventional. Wouldn't recommend it. I didn't know any better, to be honest. And I take responsibility in thinking that I should have definitely done a little bit of research before I, agreed to something like that. But I was trusting in the experienced diver and, now I've learned a lesson. Sometimes do your own research.
I mean, it's one of those things, too, because at the very beginning of, your diving career, there's so much information just thrown at you, even when you come into class, right? It's like, okay, this button, that button, do this, do that. And
Exactly.
it is so much information. And then when you don't have all of that information, I could definitely see it just not going good.
Exactly.
But, I feel like it's one of those things, though, that, like you're saying, lesson learned. So moving forward, I don't know if you're planning on going the instructor route, which I was going to ask you if you are going to go the instructor route. Having those memories and that experience, you'll make sure that never happens to future students because it's so, ingrained in your memory.
It's unbelievable how, unsafe it was. I can't believe that event even happened. It blows my mind to even think about anybody in the dive industry that I know doing that. It's unheard of, really.
Just curious, have you spoken or been back to that area since you've become certified and just avoiding it at all?
I have not, no. I have not.
Well, tell me a little bit about going through the progression from open water to advanced to rescue. How did you find the skills? How did you find the theory, the practice? Because I know rescue, I always tell people if diving is going to be something that you're going to get into, especially if you're a family of divers, sometimes you have the family that comes in and gets all certified together. I always tell people rescue, you should at least make it to rescue because it changes your way of thinking. And it creates a different diver. You start thinking more about than just yourself, which all should be taught in open water, I know, but realistically, it's one of those things. But tell me about the courses and how you found it, the advanced through to the rescue, and then I'd like to ask about the dive master training because that's always fun.
Yeah, so advanced was super fun because I had a handful of other divers that I went through open water with, and we were all like, heck yeah, let's do advanced together. So it was kind of nice that we had, the same divers going and progressing. So you're kind of familiar with them and you get along with them, we're still friends to this day. So it's great. Every organization does it a little bit differently, but our requirements were deep, navigation, and peak performance buoyancy. So those were our three, and then we got to choose two. So I think I did deep diver and search and recovery or something like that. So those were all fun. And honestly, I didn't think I'd go any farther than advanced because my instructor had said, it's always good to do continued education, just gives you more experience, more tools under your belt in diving. So it's like, okay, I'll do advanced. And well, obviously fell in love with it. And it was funny because on my deep dive, my mom always loves to hear about my dives, right? And so on my deep dive, I didn't want to tell her that I was doing my deep because I knew she would worry so much. So we go to Catalina and she knows we're diving, whatever. I call her, I was like, hey mom, I just went to 100 feet. And she was like, what? She was like, I'm so glad you didn't tell me because she would have just been worrying the whole time. But so that was advanced. And then moving on to rescue. Rescue, I always tell students this, even, fellow divers, it's the most challenging course, but I think it's the most beneficial in every way, shape, and form. I think it's the most fun, but also the most rewarding. And I think that every diver should do at least rescue, personally. Like exactly what you said, it should be taught in open water, but that's just so much information, Yeah, rescue was very physical. I mean, as you can imagine, I was smaller than I am now, and I remember on my final scenario, they had me tow and rescue basically the biggest guy on our dive team. And I was like, you know what? Challenge accepted. If I can do this, I can hopefully rescue anybody if need be. And I did it. It was, man, let me tell you, I ate good after that training session.
Oh,
but
that's awesome.
Like I said, rescue is something I'd recommend every diver do. It's invaluable. It's the most valuable skills you'll learn in diving, I think.
Definitely. I completely agree. And it's one of those classes too. It really, what I like about the progression going through courses is your confidence is slowly being built up, right? And after open water, you feel like, man, this is amazing. And then you start to see all these different routes and all these different avenues that you could go. And then you take the advance, it kind of opens up the door a little bit more to the different routes. And then when you take rescue, I definitely feel like your confidence coming out of that, you feel like you could just take on the world, and you're like, let's do this, and it really does just kind of flip the switch. And so from the dive master training, how did you find the skills, and how did you find all of that going into, I guess, not even I guess, but the professional side? Now it's like, okay, now I have to look after other divers. I've been taught these skills. Now I'm going into the professional side of it. How did you find that whole transition?
Yeah, it was a completely 180. It was so different. I wasn't used to trying to perform the skills for another student. I can do it with my eyes shut doing the skills, but then trying to help somebody else do that and teach them the ways of it, it's just, you have to completely switch your way of thinking. Not only that, but being a professional in diving, you have to almost anticipate when something is going to happen, a panic diver or a situation. And it's kind of like using those clues and body language and those little habits to realize like, oh, something's about to go down, and realize it before it happens, which is, again, something that some people can learn and some people just have, and maybe it's a mix of both. But Dive Master was challenging. I still think rescue is the most challenging, at least for me. But Dive Master is more about teaching in a way and relaying the information so that somebody else can understand it. It's more about, like you said, focusing on other divers and not just yourself. It was a great course. I went from open water to dive master in 10 months, and everyone was like, oh, she's a, what do they call it? Like 0 to 100, like 100, what do they call it? A 100 diver or something like that. And it's like, no, I'm not just doing this for, just to have the name of dive master. I loved it so much. I was diving multiple times a week, in that freezing cold water. But, I love every aspect of the dive master route. I love helping out in the classroom. I love teaching in pool sessions and doing Discover Scubas and refreshers and teaching in the ocean. It's all part of it, and I love literally every aspect of it.
I mean, everybody's progression is different, right? There's a lot of names that will get thrown around, but I feel like when you're going through it, and I always tell people, as long as you're going through it and you're safe and you're learning, that's the biggest thing, right?
Exactly.
Let me ask this. Tell me about the diving there. So I've never been diving in Southern California. It's sad to say, I'm trying to think. Like, I lived there for 6 years. I don't even know if I actually went into the ocean. I'm sure I had to have at some point in time.
Oh my gosh.
I was a snowboard bum just living in the mountains. So it's like,
okay.
But
that's
yeah,
fair.
tell me about the diving. Tell me about the conditions, the different, popular dive sites. Just tell me a little bit more about the diving in Southern California.
Yeah, so I'd say the biggest dive attraction in Southern California is the Channel Islands. You have Catalina, Anacapa, Santa Cruz Island, and a lot of people don't even know that there's islands off the coast of Southern California, but there is, and it is a marine protected area. It's a marine sanctuary, so the life is just incredible. There's science talk about how the islands are like a juvenile white shark sanctuary, and there's all these great white sharks out there, and I've never seen one. The day I do will be the best day of my life, but I've heard great stories about them. So Channel Islands is probably the biggest dive site there, but like I said, we dive in Malibu and Santa Barbara, and shore diving is so great. I know a lot of people like boat diving. We call it sometimes princess diving because it's fun, it's easy, it's a good way to go. But I love the shore diving aspect because, you pull up off Pacific Coast Highway and you go out to the dive site, you come back in a couple hours. It's not a whole day event. But yeah, Malibu, there's, like I said, Point Dume, there's Leo Carrillo, there's Broad Beach, Deer Creek. These are all just separate beaches that actually have all reefs off of them. So some of them are rocky reefs that'll have like lobsters and eels, and actually lobster season's coming up this week, so we're trying to choose our dive site for lobster season. And in Santa Barbara, there's a few dive sites. There's Refugio and Tahigas dive site, which, again, rocky reef, but also there's kelp forest. And the kelp forest is my absolute number one favorite place to dive. I've dove, the Great Barrier Reef. I've dove Hawaii. I've dove Mexico. But there's nothing like the kelp forest. It might be freezing cold. It is freezing cold, but it trumps every other type of diving, in my opinion.
Okay, that's awesome. So it's funny. I remember the first time I went diving. It was my Discover Scuba Dive. I'm in the dive shop. The instructor is like, "Oh, it's gonna be great. You're gonna see this. You're gonna see that. You're gonna be swimming with the sharks." And I remember when he first said that, like in my head, I'm thinking, I'm completely new to this. I'm thinking Jaws. I'm thinking just all the bad stuff. Right? So
Yeah.
I'm like, what? And it almost actually stopped me. And then he was like, no, it's not what you think. Blah 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 blah. It's this amazing experience. You're gonna be the sharks are super friendly. Obviously, years later, I've informed myself quite a bit more, but I've never been in the water with a great white shark. To be honest, I don't know how I would feel about being in the water with a great white shark. I think it would be absolutely amazing. I think it would be like running into a bear in the middle of the woods or something. It's just this magnificent beast, this magnificent creature.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so so are they seen quite a bit there? Can you see, because they are seen there, right? Can you tell me a little bit about the sharks in that area?
I haven't heard of any divers seeing one on a dive. They see them from fishing boats and little tourist boats all the time. Maybe not all the time, but a handful of times. And they'll see them. Kayakers, if they're fishing, they'll see them. But again, I haven't had any divers that I know or heard of seen any.
Oh, okay. So it's not a common thing.
No, the only type of shark I've ever seen off of our coast is a thresher shark, which is actually really cool. I saw it in Santa Barbara, and that was exciting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, these days, anytime I get a chance to see a shark, I'm just absolutely excited.
Exactly.
But the thing is, I've never seen one bigger than me, so I'm just like, okay, when that happens, I'm sure the adrenaline levels will just be spiking. Like, holy cow,
Oh,
this is amazing.
100%.
And then the other question I wanted to ask is about lobster season. So tell me a little bit about that, because I don't really know much. I mean, I'm assuming it's like any other hunting season. You can go out and catch them. It's okay. How are people catching them? Is there a limit? And are they good to eat?
Yeah. So lobster season actually starts this Friday, a couple days from now. I think it's 27th of September, but at least in Southern California. And 6 p.m., we're going to be out there. I personally don't hunt for lobsters. I'm just along for the ride to cheer them on. But they do grab them by hand if they're in, little cracks and crevices. They have, little techniques to kind of lure them out, flashlight, or they'll kind of put their hands out and try and get them curious, and then they'll grab them from behind. But the California lobsters don't have any claws, so they're called the California spiny lobster. So they have just these little, they're not even spines, they're like little bumps on their back is basically their protection. So they don't have any pinchers, which is great. But from what I've heard, they're really good eating. Again, haven't had one myself or cooked it up, but I know that 7 is the limit per diver per day. You can max out. I don't remember what the size limit is. I think it's like a 4.25-inch carapace. I could be totally wrong, but you have to have 2 measuring tools on you when you're diving. And the California Department of Fish and Wildlife is always out. They'll come up to you after your dive and, check all your catch. And if one's not of size, then you are in big, big trouble.
Oh, okay. So just curious, do you not eat seafood in general, or just not eat lobsters?
I do. I eat basically everything. I'm so cheap. I just don't want to pay for the hunting license. So I just let everyone else have fun, and I just tag along for the ride.
Oh, okay. What's the cost for the license?
So you have to get a hunting license and a lobster card. And I want to say it's probably not more than like $100 or something. But I'm like, diving's already expensive, I'm going to spend that on something else,
Well, it's so random because it's funny. I go back and forth on the seafood. It's one of those things like when I'm in the water and swimming around with them, diving around with them, I'm like, oh, I don't want to eat you. Like, I just like, I feel like I grow this connection with them or something. And then, so generally I try not to eat seafood, but being based in Southeast Asia, it's such a big part of the cuisine here. And so I've tried to limit it. There are certain things I will not eat anymore just because, like I have a hard time, and not even a hard time, like I won't eat octopus if I can help it, you know, if it's one of those things, I just won't eat it because I'm like, man, I love these things so much. I know in parts of Asia, they'll eat turtles. I just can't. I just cannot do that. Eels, I'm so torn because I love sushi and it's so good, but I love seeing them in the water. They're like one of my favorite things to see in the water. They're just like
me too.
Yeah, so it's one of those things. But yeah, so I was just curious. And the other question I wanted to ask you, so marine biology, can you tell me a little bit about, you know, why you went into that field, what you're doing with it, and the just, you know, the process of obtaining a marine biology degree?
I grew up around the ocean. You know, I've lived in Southern California basically my whole life. So grew up at the beach on weekends. My mom would take us, you know, after work. We'd go have dinner on the beach and whatnot. And so honestly, going into undergrad at university, I had no idea what I wanted to do. But I was like, you know what? I love the ocean. Marine science. Let's do it. So I went to do my bachelor's degree at Cal State Monterey Bay. So that's on the Central Coast. I did 5 years of undergrad there, and I loved it. You know, the last couple of years of undergrad, I was doing all this field work in the intertidal zone in the Monterey Bay. So I was looking at the abalones, the urchins, all that population and density, and it was just the most fun ever. I enjoyed it so much. And then I took a couple of years off, just going through some life things, and then I decided I want to go to grad school. It's like, I love it so much. I actually really enjoy school. I like learning things. I like progressing and challenging myself in different ways. So then I went to grad school. I was going to go to school at James Cook University in Australia. 2020 happened. The borders shut down. Everything closed. So I kept deferring my enrollment for about a year and a half. I was like, you know what? I'm kind of tired of waiting for this. I can't do my degree online because it is so field-based. So I actually ended up going to Jacksonville University in Florida for a year. I really enjoyed my professors there. I enjoyed the school. It was great, but it wasn't where I wanted to be. I just, in the back of my head, was just like, oh, but what about Australia? I'm so bummed about it. Well, about a year into school in Florida, the Australian borders opened up, and I was like, I'm in. I'm going back. So the school, they actually reinstated my acceptance and my scholarship and everything. They gave me everything that I had originally before COVID. So I picked up my life in Florida, and 5 weeks later, I was moving to Australia. That was just like the biggest, just greatest thing that happened to me in so long. I was so stoked to go to Australia. So I went to James Cook University. It's in northern Queensland, right on the Great Barrier Reef. You know, all the advertisements online say it's the #1 in the world for marine bio. It is for a reason. It was a great school. I did my thesis on marine debris on the Great Barrier Reef, just on beaches. It was a great experience. You know, I got to be on the beach for almost a year straight, you know, just collecting trash and doing what I enjoy. Yeah, it was a great experience. I miss Australia very much, but it is very far.
I want to say it's like super far from me. I want to say I haven't been. We were looking at maybe trying to go there at some point. I've made a lot of friends that live in Australia. I've had a few people that have been on the podcast, more than a few people at this point that from Australia on the podcast. And it's one of those destinations that it's always been in the back of my mind. I'm going to date myself right now, but so growing up, there, you know, the Crocodile Dundee movies, which I'll probably get a lot of shit for even saying that, but it just probably put the fascination of Australia in my head, and it's one of those places that I've always wanted to visit, but I have not been. Can you tell me a little bit about like living there and the differences? Because there's always a little bit of culture shock moving to a new place or a new country, I should even say, because that's not like,
Yeah.
moving from California to another state over. That's like
Yeah.
literally on the other side of the world. So can you tell me a little
Yeah.
bit about the experiences there?
Yeah, I was actually just telling my friend, I'm like, it was literally the farthest place I could possibly go. It's way far. Yeah, it definitely was somewhat of a culture shock. They still speak English and are still very similar to the States in some ways, but a lot of it was very different. The main thing I noticed was how just nice and welcoming the Australian people are. They are just the loveliest people. Now, I will say, their food, I might get a lot of hate for this. Not a big fan of the meat pies, Sausage rolls and meat pies are like, they're all right. But another big thing that I noticed is, politics and religion is not a big thing over there. Like, they're not so divided, and that's one thing I just loved about that country was that, everybody has their own things and nobody really cares. Everybody, likes you regardless. Safety, I felt very safe in Australia at all times. I could bring up a lot of things about, differences in countries, but those were the main things that I noticed.
I think it's something that everybody, if you have the opportunity, should experience, is going to another country and just seeing that basically I don't want to say not being in a bubble, because I realize that it is a privilege. It is an opportunity to be able to go to another place and experience these new things, because it really does open your eyes to things are different. We won't get into the politics and this and that of the world or whatnot, but to be able to see how different people live and the different cultures and how they intermingle and all this stuff, I really truly believe it like just helps everybody grow within. Not to get super deep, I just got really deep right there, didn't I?
It's totally true, and I always say that to my friends. I'm like, moving to all these places, I've lived in so many different places, just makes me realize how fortunate I was to grow up where I grew up. More than 90% of the world isn't like that, and it's crazy, and it makes me feel more motivated to give back where I can and do better.
So I'm actually a California baby myself. I was born in Santa Clara, grew up in the Bay Area for a while. When we were, how old was I? I remember it was like kindergarten, first grade. My mother is from Thailand, so my father's like, hey, let's move to Thailand. I remember growing up, like, looking like, I guess through the eyes of a child, you don't really know, things are very different. And then coming back to the States, you're like, wow, things are very different.
Yeah,
but it was
exactly.
This great opportunity to be able to move and experience these different things and kind of take that moving forward. But not to change the subject off of diving real quick, or to get back to the diving aspect.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the diving that you did in Australia, because obviously the Great Barrier Reef is an amazing, well-known place. Probably one of the most known place in the world. And I know that there's, from the information that you see, it's, you talk to one group of people, it's like, oh, it's not what it was 20 years ago. I've heard it's still absolutely amazing to visit. I mean, nothing's like it was 20 years ago, right? But tell me a little bit about the diving that you did out there.
Yeah, so I moved out there with all of my dive gear with the intention of diving all the time. And well, as a grad student, you don't get a lot of time, but I also didn't have a car, so to transport my dive gear just wasn't really an option that was easily accessible. So I actually only ended up diving there 3 or 4 times, but the places that I did dive were just incredible. I got to dive off of this island called Magnetic Island. It was in the middle of winter, and I didn't know the Great Barrier Reef could get cold, but it was 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what the conversion is, but it was cold. I thought the Great Barrier Reef was warm at all times. I was wrong. So that was my first, I guess, culture shock too. But that was a great dive. The dive master we were with said it was actually like a pretty dead day on the reef. Like there wasn't much that we saw, but it was just so different than anything I had dove ever before. So I was excited for it. Then I dove in Airlie Beach at the Whitsundays, and that was incredible. I remember the boat captain being like, oh, sorry guys, it's a low day of visibility today. Like, what are you talking about? It's like 50 feet. And he's like, yeah, normally we're at like 100 feet. And I was like, a good day in California is like 10 feet. What are you talking about? This is great. And it was just like such a funny interaction that we had. But the coral reefs are just incredible out there. The colors, and there are these clams out there that are just like the brightest green, the bright neon fluorescent colors. It's crazy that nature can do that. The last place I dove was the Yongala, the wreck dive out of kind of central Queensland, but that was an amazing dive. It's basically a wreck, and it's at about 100 feet, I think it was, and visibility was kind of it was hazy, but there was the small eye stingray. This thing is huge. It's the world's largest and most rare stingray, if I'm correct. And it was, I don't know, it felt like 6 to 7 feet, like wingspan, and it just swam directly over me. And it was like that was the one time I've ever cried underwater. It was just like one of those moments that was like, holy cow, I can't believe I get to be here witnessing this right now.
I absolutely love that. Those moments that you have underwater that, I mean, they literally stick with you for the rest of your life. So, no, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Even to be able to get those dives in must have been an absolutely amazing experience. And then just real quick, I actually wanted to ask, so out of your whole family, are you the only diver?
I initially was, yeah. I was the only diver. And then, as I became dive master and progressed, I actually got my 2 younger brothers to do diving with me. So there's a handful of us now in the family that are divers. They don't dive as often as I do, but I've influenced them a bit. So I'm happy about that.
Oh, that's awesome. That's super awesome. Speaking of the progression, are you going towards instructor?
That's something I have thought about a lot, actually, especially right after my dive master. For my graduation present to myself for grad school, I was going to go do my instructor course. And the more I thought about it, maybe I'm just a bit closed-minded in this aspect, but I kind of like not having huge liability. I like being a dive master. I like my role as a dive master. I don't know if I want to take on more responsibility in that way, but I'm also super busy right now. I actually just spent the last 6 months doing a sheriff's academy for a search and rescue dive team. So I've been super busy with that. So that's kind of put instructor kind of on the back burner for a little bit. It's a never say never type of thing, but right now I don't think I'll be doing instructor anytime soon.
The sheriff's search and rescue, you did that training?
Yeah. So it's all volunteer based. We're the only search and rescue dive team that's volunteer in the state of California, to my knowledge. But you still have to go through the sheriff's search and rescue academy, which is 6 months long. We started that back in March, and I actually just made the team a couple of weeks ago. So I wanted to be able to chat about that on this podcast with you, which is why I said can we do it later September? Because I didn't want to talk about it and not make the team. That would be a little weird. But it's something that I just kept under wraps for a bit until I made the team. But yeah, so the search and rescue dive team, my dive dad, my instructor, has been on the team for quite a number of years now, and he has always talked about it. Oh, you should do it. But every time there was an academy, I was out of the country or living in Florida or Hawaii, whatever. I was away. And, I finally moved back from Australia, a year ago now, and the academy started in March, and I was like, I am in. I don't have anything going on this summer. I'm doing it. So it was every weekend for 6 months straight. It was incredibly challenging, mentally, physically, all of the above. But it's the most rewarding thing I think I've ever done in diving.
What pushed you? Is that something that, I mean, obviously I don't think that you thought you would be doing that when you did your open water course or anything like that. But
Yeah.
I would assume, because that's got to be a very different aspect of diving. Can you tell me a little bit more about what they do and the type of diving that they're doing?
The search and rescue team is, a lot of people think so you're just finding, people. Well, that's not all we do. We're, finding evidence, or we're doing searches for something that was missing or whatnot. We're called out to mutual aid with other teams, the mountain team or the air unit or whatever, if we need to go find something or whatever it is. So it's definitely something that's not for everybody. To be honest, I never thought I'd be doing it, like you said, especially as an open water student. Even up until like last year, I didn't think I would ever have the time or the mental capacity to really do it. But when the time rolled around for it, I was like, you know what? Like I mentioned, I love challenging myself, especially in diving, because I know that I can do more than what my head tells me I can. It's like, this is the perfect opportunity. And there was several times in the academy, I was like, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I really don't. You know, I'm just some small girl, and people probably think of me a little bit differently. Like, you're on search and rescue, really? But I know my skills and I know my abilities, and being able to kind of implement that in the academy, but also grow exponentially as a diver and as a human, honestly, because you're put under pressure in different situations. It's so rewarding. And I finally actually got my first call out last week for something, but that was exciting. I was like, it's my first call out. It was such like an exciting and like monumental moment. And I should also preface, it wasn't for a person. I'm not laughing and smiling because I'm, excited about that, but it was for a regular search for something else that I can't talk about, but it was an exciting moment to have that first call out.
I'm curious to know, like, the type of training that goes into it, because it's a 6-month long course. Is that every day?
Mm-hmm.
Or not every day, or what's like the duration? What's the course like? Is it like every weekend, every day? How many hours?
Yeah, so it was Fridays and Sundays. Fridays was the classroom and, education. And during the week, they were like, okay, you have to read these chapters of the manual. So we'd read those chapters. Then Friday night would be the classroom where they would talk about it. We would do a quiz. And then Sunday would be the application. So it would be either in the pool, a lake, or the ocean. We'd do some type of diving on Sundays. Gosh, the training manual is laundry list long, basically, but it's very similar to like a public safety diver course, just with quite a bit more added onto it, just because it is sheriff's department. But training includes, oh my goodness, we did a lot of training on entanglements. We had like a blackout mask. We all got trained in full face masks and pony bottles and how to, bail out to your pony bottle, bail out of your full face mask. We would do a ton of search patterns. We'd do the search patterns where we're tethered to a line. We'd have zero visibility. So we'd have, again, a blackout mask on. We'd do training if there was an emergency. We did actually do a lot of rescue class skills also. And that was actually a minimum requirement for our team, was to be rescue, which pretty smart on their end. And then at the very last week of the academy was actually, we jumped out of a helicopter, which was like, I was so nervous for this weekend. It was like, oh my goodness. It wasn't the height aspect. I'm not scared of heights. It's just the helicopter and jumping out of it in full dive gear that was just kind of like, oh, I guess I'm doing this now. And, and what's funny is my dive dad had really cool photos from his first helicopter jump, and he shares them, every year we do this training. And I'm like, man, you're such a badass. I can't wait to do that. And I remember always sharing it on my social media. My dive instructor is such a badass. Look how cool he is. That's awesome that he's doing that. And, the day comes and I'm like, oh my gosh, now I'm doing it. And so, yeah, it was so nerve-wracking. And, the Black Hawk helicopter comes down, or they call it a Fire Hawk because it's not, I think Black Hawk is the military version of what we have. But Fire Hawk comes down and everything happened so fast. It was like a roller coaster where it's just over in a split second. Literally from us loading up onto the helicopter, ascending, going over to and jumping in the water was less than 3 minutes. I don't know how it was that fast, but we were like boom, 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 jumping out, we're in the water. It was, I didn't even have time to think about being nervous, which was kind of a good thing.
Yeah. Well, awesome. I have just one last question for you before I let you go. Speaking of the search and rescue, so somebody that is maybe looking to do that type of training, to do that type of diving, to get into that course, what is the best piece of advice that you could give them?
Your mind is stronger than you think it is. You can do more than whatever your brain is telling you you can't do. Because to me, I feel like the mental aspect of that course and anything in diving is the hardest part to get over. If you're all in your head, that's going to kind of mess you up. But if you can get out of your head and know that you can do it, that you're capable, and you're going to fail, and that's all part of growing and learning, is having those challenges and those failures, but then you get right back up and you just do it a little bit differently next time, and you'll have your team and whoever else cheering you on to get through it. And that's genuinely exactly how I got through it. Was, you know, my dive dad and my entire group of shop people, my dive family is what I call them, that, you know, was cheering me on through the whole way. And, you know, when I'd get down on myself, they'd be there to pick me up. So just surround yourself with people that are supportive of you, and you can do a lot more than what you think you can.
Awesome. I absolutely love it. And it's something that I continually work on, is getting out of my own head and learning to fail, right? It's like such a huge thing. Yeah. That's awesome. That's great advice. And Gabs, I really, really want to thank you for coming on to the podcast today. I appreciate all the patience through it's all that dive master and search and rescue training, the patience through all the technical internet issues that I'm dealing with. But no, I absolutely appreciate you coming onto the podcast. It was amazing to hear your journey, amazing to hear your story. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you chatting with me. I love all things dive talk, so it was great.
Off-gassing, a scuba podcast.